She stood in court, accused of assaulting a police officer. But what Zuri Coleman actually did was stop that officer from hurting a defenseless child. Now she faces a courtroom that twists her truth, a judge who won't hear her, and a system built to silence girls like her. Zuri came here to defend her name, but what happens when standing for what's right puts everything at risk, including her freedom. Will one teenage girl's quiet courage be enough to expose the truth? If this story speaks to you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real, powerful stories. Now let's step inside that courtroom and see how it all began. That day, the courtroom in Stonefield was unusually quiet. Not because it was empty, far from it. The benches were filled shoulder to shoulder with townspeople who had come to see the hearing, but no one spoke, no one dared. She entered into that silence. Her name was Zuri Coleman, 17 years old, black, tall and lean with no makeup and her hair pulled neatly back. She wore a plain shirt, pressed jeans, and worn sneakers. No one knew who she was. They only saw a young black girl in handcuffs led to the defendant's chair facing a serious charge assaulting a police officer. Zuri did not bow her head. She didn't scan the room for support. Her eyes locked straight ahead on the bench where the judge sat. That look alone caused a few in the front rows to shift in their seats, as if this girl understood exactly where she was walking into and had still chosen to walk tall. Judge Ellen Grayson, a white woman in her early 50s with sharp features and an even sharper gaze, sat in her robe, lips tight. She was known in Stonefield as a judge who let no emotion interfere with the law, but everyone in town understood what that really meant. If you were black, don't expect to finish a sentence. There was no introduction, no acknowledgement. As Zuri sat at the defense table, Judge Grayson began reading the charges in a flat tone as if reciting a grocery list. Violent behavior, obstruction of a peace officer, refusal to comply, threatening language. Some in the audience nodded quietly. Others raised eyebrows. They had seen no footage, heard no testimony. But a black girl sitting alone at the defendant's table was reason enough. Zuri listened without flinching. When the judge paused, her lawyer began to rise, but Zuri lifted her hand slightly. Not high, not sudden, just enough to cause a noticeable pause in the courtroom. She asked to say one sentence. Grayson gave a glance. Just one. Zuri nodded. Her voice was calm, not shaking, but clear enough for every ear in the room. I tried to stop him from hurting a boy. That's all. There was no drama, no tears, just a plain statement of truth, and that's what made people hold their breath. No one responded. Judge Grayson didn't write anything. The prosecutor showed no reaction. Officer Denton, the man she was accused of assaulting, smirked faintly and looked back down at his stack of papers like someone waiting to flip the next scene in a script. And in that moment, almost no one noticed one simple detail. In the back corner of the courtroom, right side near the wall, sat a black man in a gray, wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses. He was still unreadable, draped in a long coat. No one paid attention to him because he didn't appear to be paying attention to anything. But behind those glasses, his eyes followed every word Zuri spoke. No one knew who he was. No one thought to ask. But if anyone had seen a national press briefing or walked the halls of the Department of Justice, they might have recognized the firm jaw and focused brow. Marshal Coleman, United States Attorney General, and the young woman on trial was his daughter. But he didn't raise a hand. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't step forward. And Zuri never once looked in his direction. She had chosen to enter this room on her own, and no matter how much the system leaned to push her down, her gaze from the moment she took her seat to the moment the charges were read never lowered. She had not come to beg. She had come to stand. As soon as Judge Grayson announced the start of testimony, Officer Travis Denton stepped forward with a confidence that felt rehearsed. His uniform was spotless, his posture controlled, and his badge caught the light like a polished truth. He didn't glance at Zuri. He didn't acknowledge the people in the gallery. His eyes were locked on the jury, as if he were delivering a well-practiced lecture, not swearing under oath in a courtroom where a young girl's future hung in the balance. He told the story cleanly. According to him, he had responded to a disturbance outside a convenience store. When he arrived, he claimed he saw a teenager acting erratically and a young black girl intervening in a scene she didn't understand, obstructing a lawful order. He said she shouted, stepped aggressively toward him, refused to back down, and finally assaulted him by shoving him in the chest. Denton paused as if recalling a moment of personal danger, then added firmly that at that moment I genuinely felt threatened. Some people in the room nodded quietly. A man in the second row even closed his eyes as if he were confirming a truth he already believed. And that's the problem. When a lie is told calmly and confidently enough, it doesn't need evidence. It just needs time to settle. "We have supporting video evidence," the prosecutor said, signaling to the technician. A screen lit up near the jury box. A short video played from a security camera mounted outside the store. It showed Zuri entering the frame, moving quickly toward a child, then turning back toward Officer Denton. It captured the moment she pushed him. Then it ended. No audio, no footage of what came before, no sign of the boy being restrained, no shot of Zuri's arms twisted behind her, no image of her being slammed into the side of a patrol car. The room stayed silent. No one quite knew how to respond. The video, though brief, created an impression. And in a courtroom, an early impression often acts as a temporary verdict. Zuri tilted her head toward the screen, her brow slightly furrowed. Her attorney stood to speak, asking the court's permission to present the full, unedited footage. He explained that the context was essential, that cutting a video to fit a narrative was not only misleading, but dangerous. Judge Grayson didn't look at him. She tapped her gavel once and said, "This court will not be delayed by unnecessary footage. What we've seen is sufficient." The attorney sat down slowly, not because he had nothing left to say, but because he understood. Some walls inside a courtroom aren't made of brick and mortar. They are built from the habits of a system that has long decided whose voice matters. Zuri's eyes turned toward the witness stand. Her voice was steady, not loud, but it sliced through the quiet like a pin through cloth. "Play the whole thing," she said. "Show how he slammed me down." A sharp breath escaped from somewhere in the back. A young woman bit her lip and placed her hand over her heart. Denton still didn't look at Zuri. He gave a small shrug and chuckled under his breath. Then he said it. "She got aggressive, like they always do." That sentence was not an accident. It was not a slip. It was delivered with chilling ease, like someone finishing the last line of a familiar script. And those in the room who had lived longer, who had heard those same words back in the 60s and 70s and even last week, knew that the real danger was not in the shove or the raised voice. The danger was in how a person could be defined entirely by skin color and a set of expected behaviors. Zuri didn't flinch, but something in her eyes changed. They were darker now, deeper. Not because she had never heard that sentence before, but because she likely had, and she knew she would again. In the far corner of the courtroom, the man in the gray hat and dark glasses sat still, but this time his hands tensed in his lap for just a second, then relaxed, quiet as ever, watching, waiting. Zuri stood before the courtroom, her posture calm yet unwavering under the weight of countless eyes. When it was her moment to speak, her voice came steady and measured. "He wasn't threatened," she said quietly but clearly. He was in control. Those words hung in the charged silence, simple but piercing, slicing through the tension like a quiet but determined breath. Before she could say more, Judge Grayson's eyes narrowed sharply. Without hesitation, she interrupted. "Miss Coleman," she said with a firm tone, "this court is no place for speculation or accusations. You will speak only when spoken to and always with respect for this courtroom." The warning was unmistakable, a reminder that resistance here was unwelcome. Zuri nodded, understanding the rules. Yet within her, the resolve to stand tall remained untouched. She chose carefully how to navigate this hostile space. Before the judge could continue, Officer Denton leaned forward from the prosecution's table. His voice was low but carried enough authority to fill the room. "Respect the badge," he said, "or face the consequences." His words were more than a command, they were a threat cloaked in the power his uniform gave him. A subtle shift rippled through the courtroom. Some glanced away, unwilling or unable to meet Zuri's gaze. Others gripped their seats tighter, the air thick with unspoken tension. Zuri responded softly, but with undeniable strength. Not all badges mean law, she said, her voice steady despite the quiet murmurs swirling around her. Her statement barely rose above a whisper, but struck a deep chord with those who heard it. In that heavy silence, a small voice broke through. A child no older than 9 sat beside her mother and whispered, "She's not mean. She's just alone." Those words floated like a fragile breath across the room. They carried a weight heavier than any argument. A reminder that behind every case, behind every charge, there is a person often isolated, often unheard, but always human. Zuri's quiet defiance shifted the atmosphere in the courtroom, not through loud declarations or dramatic outbursts, but through the sheer strength of her presence and the power of her words. It was a wound inflicted not by fists, but by truth, a truth that lingers, reminding everyone present of the cost of silence and the courage it takes to speak even when the world tries to silence you. The judge's gaze flickered toward Zuri once more, an unreadable expression passing across her face. The battle in that courtroom was far from over, but for a moment, Zuri had carved out a space for truth amidst the noise. Zuri's mind briefly wandered inward. I knew speaking would bring consequences, she thought, but silence would betray everything I stand for, not just for me, but for that child I tried to protect. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of support, but all she saw were averted gazes, stiff shoulders, and a silence heavy with judgment. She could feel the jury's eyes on her, impassive and unreadable, yet the tension in the air was palpable. Some clenched their fists under the bench, others exchanged uncertain looks. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, caught between justice and prejudice. Denton's words echoed again in her ears, sharp and chilling. This badge isn't just metal, it's power, and power demands respect. His smirk was a cruel reminder that in this room, respect was a currency not earned by truth, but demanded by force. But Zuri did not flinch. Her quiet strength was a challenge to every whispered judgment and every glance of dismissal. She knew this was only the beginning. The words she spoke here were not just for the courtroom, they were a call to every silent witness to injustice. And somewhere in the back of the courtroom, a man watched silently. His hands clenched briefly before relaxing. His eyes never left Zuri. He understood the weight she carried because he carried it too. The fight was far from over, but in this moment, a single voice had begun to rise. In the quiet solitude of the courthouse hallway, away from the murmurs and piercing gazes of the courtroom, Zuri Coleman found a moment of refuge. She stood before a simple mirror, studying her reflection. The face that looked back was young yet marked by something far older, a quiet determination, a flicker of an unyielding flame. There was vulnerability there, yes, but beneath it lay a strength forged in years of quiet resolve. Her mind drifted to a memory from her childhood, a moment so vivid it played like a whispered conversation in her heart. Sitting on her father's lap, she had asked him in a trembling voice, "What if they twist what I say? What if they make me out to be the bad one?" Marshall Coleman. Her father had looked at her with a calm that seemed to hold the weight of the world. "Then speak anyway," he said softly. "Let their lies bend and break. Your truth is what stands straight." Those words had planted a seed within her, a quiet rebellion that had taken root and grown stronger with every challenge she faced. Zuri reached into her bag and pulled out a well-worn notebook, its edges softened by time. She opened to a carefully marked page and began reading the words printed there. Laws against excessive force, rights to protect oneself and others, the limits of authority. Her fingers traced the lines, gently drawing strength from the knowledge they held. Though her hand trembled slightly, her gaze remained unwavering, steady, and resolute. She took a slow breath, pushing back the creeping shadows of doubt and fear that threatened to overwhelm her. This was not a fight to win in a day or even a courtroom. It was a fight to keep her sense of self intact, to stand tall in a world ready to diminish her. Her thoughts deepened as she prepared to leave the sanctuary of the hallway. Every time I open my mouth, I risk losing more than just words. She thought I risked their judgment, their scorn, the chance to be heard again. But silence. Silence is a cage I refuse to live in. She closed the notebook gently, tucking it back into her bag as if placing her armor away, ready for the next battle. A soft knock echoed from the courtroom door, a reminder that the world outside this quiet moment demanded her return. She did not hurry, but she did not hesitate. With measured steps, she walked back toward the courtroom. Her shoulders squared with renewed purpose. This was not a march toward victory, but a stand against defeat, not for applause, but for survival. As she moved through the halls, she caught a glimpse of her attorney watching from the courtroom entrance. His expression was unreadable hope and worry wrestling beneath his composed facade. She offered him a brief nod, a silent reassurance that she was still standing. The air seemed heavier, now charged with anticipation. Zuri knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but inside her burned a quiet fire, a steady flame fed by truth, courage, and an unbreakable will to be seen and heard. And as she crossed the threshold back into the courtroom, that fire was ready to light the darkness that awaited. The courtroom was tense as Zuri stepped forward to take the witness stand again. Her steps were steady, though inside a storm brewed a mix of resolve and fatigue. The air felt thick, every eye trained on her, as if waiting for the inevitable to unfold. Officer Denton watched her approach with a cold intensity. Without warning or hesitation, he moved closer. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with a grip that was firm, unyielding, almost possessive. "You really think someone's going to save you?" He whispered, a sneer barely masked by his calm tone. The sudden force sent a shock through Zuri's body, but her voice rose sharply, cutting through the murmurs and silence alike. "Don't touch me," she cried, her words raw, carrying the weight of all the injustice pressing down on her. The judge's gavel came down hard, shattering the moment. "Order in the court." Judge Grayson's voice rang through the room, crisp and commanding. She turned her steely gaze to Zuri. "Miss Coleman, your behavior is inappropriate." Zuri held her ground, her chest rising and falling with quickened breaths, eyes locked on the man who dared to seize her. She was anything but intimidated. She was furious, but more than that, she was determined. Behind the rows of seats, a man stood slowly, deliberately. He said nothing, but the tension in his posture spoke volumes. His eyes were sharp and watchful, strung tight with a kind of silent fury that filled the room. It was as if the air itself had tightened the weight of his presence, impossible to ignore. The courtroom fell into an uneasy hush. Some gasped quietly. Others exchanged glances filled with disbelief. The line between order and chaos blurred in that instant. A young black girl, accused and isolated, just had her physical space invaded in the very place that was supposed to uphold her rights. Zuri's voice softened, but held a note of undeniable strength. "You think your badge makes you above the law? It does not. Not here. Not to me." The room stirred again, whispers rippling like waves across the gallery. Some faces twisted in discomfort, others in silent approval. The judge's expression hardened, her fingers tightening around the gavel. Denton released her arm with a sharp pull, but kept his eyes fixed on Zuri. His smirk returned, cold and unreadable. The message was clear. Power was being wielded, and it was not for protection. It was for control. Zuri's attorney rose, but Judge Grayson raised a hand, silencing him before he could speak. "Miss Coleman, if you cannot conduct yourself properly, I will have no choice but to hold you in contempt of court." The words hung heavy in the air, a warning and a threat. Zuri's eyes flashed, a storm gathering behind her calm exterior. She lowered her gaze briefly, then met the judge's with quiet defiance. The room held its breath. Justice had been tested in a moment as physical as it was symbolic. The question was no longer just about innocence or guilt. It was about who controlled the courtroom, who was allowed to speak, and who was expected to remain silent. In that charged silence, the man at the back of the room remained standing, his eyes unwavering. He was a witness not just to the trial, but to a system stretched thin by power and prejudice. And like Zuri, he refused to look away. This moment, raw and unfiltered, marked a turning point. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a battlefield where courage met oppression, where every act mattered, and where the fight for truth was far from over. The courtroom's air felt heavier, thicker, as if something had quietly shifted. The tension that once seemed uniform suddenly fractured, splintering into whispers and murmurs that rippled through the crowd. Eyes that had been fixed on Zuri with judgment now flickered with doubt. Some faces softened, others hardened, but no one could ignore the growing unease. From the middle rows, a woman rose abruptly. She was in her 50s, dressed plainly, but with an unmistakable air of resolve. Her voice carried clear and steady as she challenged the room. He touched her first. Why is she the one being punished? Her words cut through the silence like a sudden gust of wind. The judge's gaze sharpened and her voice echoed with authority, attempting to quell the rising unrest. Order in the court. Sit down immediately or face removal. But the command did little to quiet the growing murmurs. The question hung there unanswered, igniting a spark that refused to be extinguished. In a corner near the back, a young law student discreetly lifted her phone and began a live stream. The camera captured the moment, the tension, the challenge, the unease. The clip was shared instantly, spreading beyond the courtroom walls at a speed that startled even the most seasoned observers. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered. People from all walks of life stood shoulder to shoulder, united by the growing awareness that this was no ordinary trial. Signs of support appeared spontaneously, voices raised in chants. The hashtag, Zuri deserves to speak, began trending, a digital beacon for those who believed in justice and truth. Inside the courtroom, even the officers grew uneasy. Conversations turned to whispers, eyes darting anxiously. The power dynamics that had seemed so certain now wavered under the weight of collective scrutiny. Zuri remained seated, feeling the shift. It was subtle, but undeniable. The courtroom was no longer a place where her fate was sealed in silence. It was becoming a stage where truth once suppressed was beginning to find its voice. The man with the gray hat at the back of the room watched intently. His presence, calm but commanding, seemed to anchor the growing storm. In his eyes was the unspoken promise that this moment was far from over, that change was on the horizon. The battle lines had been drawn not just between individuals, but within the very heart of the community. Justice, fragile and contested, was waking up. And in that awakening, the quiet courage of one young woman was becoming a call to action for many. This was the moment when the courtroom began to change, when silence cracked, and the weight of truth started tipping the scales. The courtroom had changed. What had once been a room filled with judgment and silence now felt charged with an energy that could no longer be contained. Zuri sat back down after her statement, but the fire in her eyes had only grown stronger. She was no longer just defending herself. She was challenging the very system that sought to keep her quiet. When the moment came for her to speak again, her voice was calm but resolute, carrying a weight that filled the entire room. "You silence me," she said, her gaze unwavering, "not because I am wrong, but because I am right." The judge's reaction was immediate and sharp. Judge Grayson's gavel came down hard, cutting through the tension with unyielding authority. "Remove her from the courtroom," she ordered, her voice cold and final. As bailiffs approached, Zuri rose slowly, every movement deliberate and unafraid. But before she was led away, she turned sharply, locking eyes with Officer Denton. Her words cut through the thick silence like a blade. "Your badge does not make you the law," she said quietly, but firmly. "It only reminds you to obey it." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The weight of her words lingered in the air, impossible to ignore. Faces around the room revealed a mixture of shock, discomfort, and a dawning respect. Some clenched their fists under the bench, others exchanged glances that spoke volumes without words. In the back corner, the man who had been sitting quietly all along rose to his feet. No longer hidden by the shadows, Marshal Coleman stood tall and composed his presence, commanding attention without a single word spoken. His eyes never left Zuri as she was led away, his silent support a steady anchor amid the storm. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions and raw emotions. The courtroom was no longer just a place of judgment. It had become a battleground where courage met oppression, where silence faced defiance, and where truth fought to be heard. Zuri's mind raced as she was escorted down the hallway. She knew this moment was not a defeat, but a line drawn in the sand. A boundary she refused to let be crossed again. Every step away from the courtroom was a step towards something greater than herself. Her thoughts were a quiet storm. They try to break me because I threaten their power, but I am stronger than their silence. I will speak whether they listen or not. Back in the courtroom, her attorney watched with a mix of hope and worry. The fight was far from over and every moment counted. The room had shifted, the balance of power tilting just slightly. The spark that Zuri lit was beginning to catch. And somewhere deep inside the man with the gray hat, her father felt the weight of what was to come. His silent vigilance was a promise this was only the beginning of a fight that would not be easily forgotten. In that charged moment, everyone in the room understood that Zuri had done more than draw a line. She had ignited a flame, one that would burn far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The struggle for justice had found its voice. The holding cell was cold and quiet, but inside Zuri Coleman's mind a fire burned steady. She sat alone, the sounds of the courtroom fading into a distant hum, replaced by the thumping of her own heartbeat. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed a number she had called many times before, but tonight was different. Tonight she needed more than just a voice on the other end. She needed strength. "Dad," she whispered softly into the receiver. "I'm not broken. I'm ready." On the other side of the line, Marshal Coleman listened with a steady calm that came from years of fighting battles, both legal and personal. For the first time, the cameras caught the full weight of his expression, the pride of a father, the burden of a nation's top legal mind, and the unwavering resolve of a man prepared to stand firm for his daughter. He nodded silently as if to say he understood that he was ready too. News of Zuri's identity spread swiftly, tearing through the usual courtroom silence and igniting a firestorm beyond the courthouse walls. Headlines flashed across television screens, computer monitors, and smartphones everywhere. "Is the girl on trial? The daughter of the U.S. Attorney General." The revelation sent ripples through the nation, turning a local case into a symbol of a larger struggle. Meanwhile, a previously unseen video surfaced. It was raw and uncut, filmed by a bystander showing Zuri being pulled against the cold metal of a patrol car, her arms twisted painfully behind her back, her body resisting. The stark reality of the footage stood in sharp contrast to the edited clips shown in court. The truth once hidden was now undeniable. The clip spread rapidly on social media, sparking outrage and empathy in equal measure. People shared it relentlessly, demanding answers and accountability, transforming quiet whispers of doubt into loud calls for justice. Back inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The certainty in the faces of the judge, the officers, and the audience gave way to unease and quiet questioning. The new evidence cast long shadows over previous assumptions. Even those sworn to uphold the law exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence beginning to waver. Zuri felt the shift deep in her bones. The walls that had once seemed impenetrable now showed cracks. The courtroom was no longer a place designed to silence her. It was becoming a place where her voice might finally be heard. Her father's presence loomed large, not just as the nation's top legal official, but as a father standing silently in the background, a steady pillar of support. His eyes, calm yet fierce, told the story of a man ready to fight the storm that was gathering. His silence spoke volumes, signaling to all that the fight was far from over. For Zuri, that phone call was more than a simple exchange of words. It was a lifeline, a promise that her quiet determination was met with powerful support. It was the moment when the small flame inside her met the winds of change outside, ready to grow into a blaze. The courtroom's walls no longer held the final say. The truth was slipping through the cracks, breaking free from the silence. Justice, long delayed, was awakening. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a reckoning. The atmosphere in this courtroom was electric with tension when Marshal Coleman entered. This was no longer the quiet, tense room from earlier. Now, the United States Attorney General had arrived, a figure whose presence demanded attention and respect, without the need for ceremony or fanfare. He did not pause to announce himself or ask permission. His voice cut through the murmurs and shifting glances, steady and commanding. "This trial ends now. The law will be reclaimed from those who have bent it. His words echoed through the room, carrying a weight that settled like a verdict before any evidence was reconsidered. The foundations of the courtroom seemed to tremble beneath the power of his declaration. Everyone present felt that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Officer Denton's once confident facade faltered. His smirk disappeared, replaced by a flicker of fear that betrayed the certainty he had worn for so long. Moments later, the sharp click of handcuffs echoed as he was restrained. The charges laid upon him were severe excessive force and perjury. The man who had wielded his badge like a weapon was now the accused, a prisoner of his own abuses. Judge Grayson sat frozen, her composed mask cracking under the weight of the moment. Within hours, she was suspended pending a formal investigation. The system that had once seemed impenetrable was now visibly cracking, exposed to the scrutiny it had long evaded. Zuri remained seated as the shackles were removed from her wrists. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes was the same unwavering gaze that had marked her from the beginning. It was a silent testament to endurance, truth, and the strength born from refusing to be broken. Her attorney's hands clenched tightly beneath the table, hope shining in his eyes like a long-awaited victory. Around the room, murmurs began to ripple, a mixture of disbelief and relief spreading through those gathered. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers growing louder. For some, hope flickered brightly for the first time. For others, the fight was far from over. In the back corner of the courtroom, Marshal Coleman stood firm. His eyes never left his daughter as she reclaimed her freedom. His calm presence was a steady anchor amid the storm, a father's promise fulfilled, and a symbol of justice reclaimed. The heavy silence that had once blanketed the room lifted, replaced by a tension charged with possibility. Change was no longer a distant hope, but a palpable force stirring in the air. The courtroom had transformed from a place of judgment and control into a battleground where courage had turned the tide. Zuri's mind raced as she adjusted to the feeling of freedom the weight lifted from her wrists. Freedom feels strange after so long confined, she thought, but my spirit has never been shackled. This moment is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who was told to be quiet. Her attorney leaned close and whispered words of encouragement. This is just the beginning. Stay strong. Zuri nodded, knowing the road ahead was still long, but this victory was a beacon lighting the path. A woman in the audience turned to her neighbor and whispered in disbelief, "Did you ever think we'd see this day?" The question lingered in the air as others nodded, the spark of change igniting hope beyond the courtroom walls. For Marshal Coleman, this was not just a professional victory. It was a personal one, a reaffirmation of his commitment as a father and as a man devoted to justice. His steady gaze conveyed more than words could avow to continue the fight no matter how difficult. Zuri had drawn a line, but more importantly, she had ignited a flame that would burn beyond these walls, beyond this case, and into the hearts of those who longed for truth and justice. The courtroom had flipped not only in outcome but in spirit. The gavel's fall that day marked the beginning of a reckoning that none present would soon forget. The headlines came quickly after the trial's conclusion. Across newspapers, websites, and social media, Zuri Coleman was dubbed the girl who would not back down. Her story of quiet resilience resonated far beyond the walls of the courthouse, capturing the hearts of people everywhere. She became more than a defendant. She became a symbol of calm strength in the face of overwhelming odds. Among the many messages she received, one touched her deeply, a letter from a young black child, written in careful, hopeful handwriting. The words inside were simple but powerful. "Thank you for standing up without yelling. I want to be like you someday." Zuri held the letter close, reading it again and again. The child's words gave her a strength she hadn't expected, a quiet reassurance that her actions, though unaccompanied by shouting or grand gestures, had made a difference. One evening in the quiet of their home, she sat beside her father and asked softly, "Did I do the right thing?" Her voice carried the weight of every doubt she had carried throughout the ordeal. Marshal Coleman smiled gently, warmth filling his eyes. "You did more than right," he said. "You stood your ground without losing yourself. That is more important than simply being right. Zuri thought about that for a moment. Sometimes, she admitted, courage did not roar. Sometimes it whispered in the face of a storm, steady and unwavering. Her silence had spoken louder than words ever could. The media's response was wide and varied. Discussions spread across talk shows, podcasts, and online forums with people debating the meaning of justice, the weight of power, and the importance of standing firm. Hashtags trended, campaigns launched, and voices rose in solidarity with the quiet girl who refused to be silenced. Outside the courthouse, groups gathered not just to witness history, but to call for change. Signs waved in the air, chants filled the streets, and hope began to ripple through communities hungry for fairness and truth. Back in the courtroom, whispers of disbelief and hope mixed among the spectators. Her attorney's eyes shone with pride, the kind born of battles fought and victories earned. The room felt lighter, as if the weight of silence had been lifted, replaced by a promise of progress. The narrator's voice softens, carrying the truth of what had unfolded. In a courtroom filled with voices of authority and power, it was the smallest voice, the one spoken with honesty, courage, and calm, that became the loudest. And that voice changed everything. Zuri's story was no longer just her own. It was a beacon for anyone who had felt unheard, a reminder that strength often lies in quiet endurance, and that true courage is standing firm without losing yourself. Her victory was a beginning, not an end, a call to action for all who dared to face injustice with dignity and resolve. And in the silence she left behind, the world finally heard everything. Thank you so much for watching this powerful story on Mr. Max Stories. Zuri's journey reminds us all that courage isn't always loud. It can be quiet, steady, and unyielding. Standing up for what is right, even when it feels like the world is against you, is the true meaning of strength. This story is about resilience, justice, and the power of a single voice to make a difference. If this story moved you, please like and share it with your friends and family. Your support helps us bring more meaningful and inspiring stories to life. Don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories to stay updated on more stories that matter. We truly appreciate your encouragement. It motivates our entire team to keep creating content that speaks to the heart. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.